Discipline, duty, unyielding will. These are the measures by which every warrior is judged. Unarmed, a warrior with these qualities will still find victory, no matter how long or outrageous the path. When guided with the sacred armaments of the Adeptus Astartes, such a warrior becomes truly indomitable. Rogul Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fist. Rogul Dorn, known as the Vigilant, the Praetorian of Terra, and the Unyielding One, and to his gene sons by the well name of Defiance, was the Primarch of the Imperial Fist Space Marine Legion, and one of the greatest heroes in the history of the Imperium of Man. A being of thunderous zeal and stone, made manifest, is how many describe the Primarch of the 7th Legion. He had a stern and naturally unsmiling face, topped with an unruly shock of short, bone white hair. His zeal was a fire of a son who believed in his father's dream for the Imperium without reservation and without question. To Rogul Dorn, there was no higher purpose to the existence of the Legiones Astartes than the unification of mankind and the illumination of the Imperium's ideals. This idealism drove Dorn and his legion ever onwards, never compromising, never sinning in the aspect of duty. The stone of his soul was his ability to bear whatever his father needed of him, an unyielding nature, which had made him both a master of defiance in war and an incomparable aggressor on the attack. If the Primarchs were the Emperor's nature split like white light through a prism's rays, as many imperial scholars of the Imperium Court suggested during the Great Crusade, then from such a point of view, Rogul Dorn was the Emperor's implacable disciple in the pursuit of his cause given flesh, without compromise, and in whose loyalty and duty was as integral as blood and breath. It was perhaps for this reason that even before the betrayal of Horus, the Emperor named Dorn the Praetorian of Terra, and drew him to his side far away from the War Master and his newly forged command. To some, Rogul Dorn and his brother Primarchs, this served only to distance him and his legion further from them. And those who among them had seen the sins of hubris and obscenity and Dorn's undoubted stubbornness and pride. Some saw this aggression as further cause for discord and disquiet. It was Dorn who supervised the construction of the formidable defenses of the Imperial Palace and the Himalayan mountains on Terra that would be sorely tested by the forces of chaos during the epic climax of the Horus Heresy and the terrible siege of Terra. And it was Dorn who would find the broken body of the Emperor upon the battleship Vengeful Spirit after his terrible and final duel with Horus. Dorn placed the Emperor's broken body upon the Golden Throne and received his last spoken instruction on how to shape the future of the war-devastated Imperium. Rogul Dorn allegedly died fighting aboard a Chaos Space Marine vessel in the late 31st millennium, after attacking the First Black Crusade's war fleet with a vastly outnumbered Imperial force. Seeing the importance of attacking the enemy fleet while they were still preparing to invade the Imperial space, he relied on hit-and-run attacks until reinforcements could arrive. Dorn was believed slain on the board of the Chaos Despoiler class battleship Sword of Sorcelich, after leading a desperate attack on his bridge. But in fact, the Imperial Fist and its successor chapters believe that Dorn is still alive somewhere, and may yet return when the Imperium needs him most. The Primarch of the Imperial Fist is second only to the Ultramarines Primarch, Rogul Guilliman, and the adoration of his name inspires the masses of the Imperium, and even amongst the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes in the 31st millennium, he is held in high regard. Dorn remained close to the Emperor's side throughout much of the Great Crusade, and stayed there during the darkest days of the Horus Heresy. When he was assigned to serve as the Praetorian of Terra and the overseer of the defenses of the Solar System in the Imperial Palace itself. Thus, it was an especially bitter fate that caused Dorn to become separated from the Emperor when he teleported onto the War Master Horus flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, at the Siege of Terra to discover his master's shattered but still living body. After the duel that finally ended the Horus Heresy was concluded. Primarchs are transcendent beings, holding a portion of the sublime and unknowable in their future. Their nature, however, holds all the qualities which seem strong in a warrior of a Space Marine Legion, exists more strongly and more deeply with greater subtlety in a Primarch. Though spun from the seed of humanity, the Primarchs are not truly human, for part of their nature was born by the power of the warp. This nature often seems to enhance and focus the qualities gifted to a legion by their gene seed. So it is at the moment at which a Primarch and legion unite. There is often a point where at which a legion's character may seem to shift. In the case of the Imperial Fist, the discovery of their Primarch and the planet which had raised him only strengthened the character of the Imperial Fist had shown since their creation. When the 20 genetically engineered nascent Primarchs were stolen from the Emperor's labs on Terra by the Ruminous powers and cast into the Materium, they were scattered throughout the galaxy upon different worlds, which would shape and mold the nature and personality of each Primarch, and later the individual, the Legiones Astartes, created from their genome. When the Primarch Robo Dorn was restored to the Imperium, and it was to be the ice world of Inwit, located in the Inwit cluster. Inwit was and is a world of death and cold. Its star is old and withered, bleeding the last of its heat as cold red light. Tidily looked against its crying star, perpetual darkness soaks one side of the planet, faded sunlight the other. Sevis's amazes. Frozen mountain ranges and plains of frost dunes over the planet's dark side. This is the splintered land, and the beast-stalk wilderness which shapes the bodies and the beliefs of the human colony population that clinges to be there. That clinges to life there. Under the ice crust, thick seas flow in sluggish and tides, and pale and sightless creatures swim the waters, hunting by vibration and paternal taste for blood. Far above the desolation, great and ancient void stations and orbital shipyards look down on the cold, shrouded world throughout the perpetual auroras created and lost past. These citadels of the void have looked down on Inwit since before any present records or tales anyone can recall. Whilst on the planet, the light side of Inwit offers little more comfort than the dark splintered lanes. Being a land drift off crusted sea-lined seas and sparse, bare rock under the unlinking blaze of the red sun. There is little value on Inwit. Its seas are buried or lifeless. Its mountains bear riches and native species viciousless. There is, however, one thing that this harsh world produces that led to its conqueror, a star, clutter and endure at an island empire of an age of strife, its people. Though they are barbaric, they are far from unsophisticated. The warriors of Inwit are raised to endure and survive. The world that bears them teaches them to never relent and that the price of weakness is death. For them and the rest of their kin, death comes in many ways on Inuit, and the ice storms that can freeze and cover a man in seconds, at the claws of the predators that foam the splintered lands, and the lapse concentration that allows to the cold to penetrate the warm seals of a hold. These factors make a certain kind of people strong, grim, and dedicated to the survival of the whole rather than the individual. Much of the world's population is nomadic, moving between the subterranean ice hives to trade in weapons, fuel, and technology. Conflict between the roaming clans is common, and young warriors learn how to defend against their clan's enemies as early as they can learn how to endure the death touch of Inuit's merciless chill. They are increasingly quick learners and have an innate sense of an object's functional value, and most importantly, they have the strength and intelligence to conquer those who possess knowledge they do not. Long ago, before the coming of the Emperor was even a dream on night-shrouded Terra, the people of Inuit began to create their own realm in the stars. On every world they took, they assimilated, realigned, and reinforced. With each conquest, their culture and learning grew. But Inuit itself remained unchanged, even as it became the center of a stellar empire. The ice hives and clan disputes remained, and while they word-birthed starships and ran its orbits with weapon stations, its rulers kept to the old ways, the ways that had created their strength. The warlords and the matriarchs who commanded armies amongst the stars, living lives little easier than their vassals. So it was, and so it is now. It was as part of its burgeoning empire that Rogal Dorn grew to manhood, and then to rule its interstellar domains as emperor. Much of its early years remain unknown, or at least little talked about. It is, however, for certain, in the cold and darkness of Inuit, a boy named Rogul, by his adoptive kin, rose to lead the House of Dorn, also known as the Ice Caste, and then to rule the Inuit cluster. The patriarch of the clan that raised Dorn became an adoptive grandfather to him, and taught him much about tactics, strategy, and diplomacy. Even after he was discovered, he was not blood related to his grandfather. Dorn held his memory in high regard. He kept a fur-edged robe that belonged to the man and slept with it on his bed every night. Dorn's Inuit qualities married perfectly with those of Inuit, and he pushed their empire further than any other. Dorn led and trained its armies and fashioned voicecraft, the like of which had never been seen before. The coming of the Emperor. Do not look to us for kindness. Do not look to us for hope. We are not but kind children of his new age. We are the rocks of his foundation. If you wish, then look to what we make. If you wish kindness, then look to those who will come after us. Rogal Dorn addresses the 300 magistrates of Terra. 40,000 standard years after his grandfather's death, the outlying imperial starships of the Great Crusade finally reached the ice hives of Inuit in 835.M30. When the true emperor was reunited with Rogal Dorn, he regained not only a lost son, but the strength of a star-spanning human society already forged into a tool of war. Dorn greeted the emperor at the helm of the enormous void ship constructed during the age of technology called the Phalanx, that he had discovered abandoned within Inuit's region of space. At this time, Dorn was the seventh of 20 Primarchs who had been found by their gene father in the course of the crusade. The Emperor welcomed Dorn as his long-lost son and returned to the Phoenix to his care, transforming it into the mobile fortress monastery of the 7th Space Marine Legion, which was also turned over by the Emperor to be led by Dorn, since all of the Astartes had been created using Dorn's own genetic template. Dorn himself was fiercely loyal to the Emperor from the first moment they met on the bridge of Phoenix. And he never once sought any favor from his father. Dorn embodied the human quest for truth and could never tell a lie, even if it would have aided his cause. Because of this quality, Dorn's salute stands as one of only 4 ever erected on McCraig, next to that of Rogul Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines. Dorn commanded the 7th Legion and its expeditionary fleets with the peerless devotion and military genius. It was said that he possessed one of the finest military minds amongst the Primarchs, ordered and disciplined, but still inclined to flashes of zeal and inspiration. His record of achievements for the Imperium during the Great Crusade was innumerable, and indeed the War Master Horus said that he esteemed Dorn and the Imperial Fist so highly that he reckoned that if the Imperial Fists, noted masters of defense, were to hold a fortress against the Lunar Wolves, noted masters of assault, the resultant conflict would spiral into a never-ending stalemate. Dorn was possessed of a single-minded energy tempered by a reserved and stoic nature. Many have remarked on the dour and emotionless disposition of both Primarchs and his legion, but such assessment misses much. Reserved, but not terrifying in anger, Dorn was both cautious and calculating, and capable of pursuing an end with relentless energy. While he would rarely show emotion, when he did, it was capable of shaking the ground or darkening the sun. During the near disastrous resurgence of the Excalican breed on the Adonis cluster, Dorn's cold rage was said to have held the battlements as such that the arms of those standing upon them. His admonishment of the reinforcements at Castoris is said to have echoes from the fire-touched sky to the still blurring sea, as swift and unforgiving as the falling edge of an axe, is how Leman Russ of the Space Marines Legion is said to have described his brother Primarch. Dorn was also capable of brooding and letting matters eat at him beneath his stone-cast demeanor. For as much as he was a warrior of absolute loyalty, he was also an idealist. The reasons why he fought were as important to him as the outcome of his efforts. During the time of the Great Crusade, few ever saw this quality in Dorn, for there was little cause, though those who knew him well could perhaps see hints of this in his near-fatal confrontation with Conrad Cruz of the Night Lord Space Marine Legion in the Korot system, and his brief schism with Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands Legion after one particular brutal campaign. It is only immediately following the horrific events of the Horus Heresy, with so much loss never to be rebuilt, and blood and still staining of the birth of the Imperium which survived, that history could see that perhaps, even in the perfect loyalty, there can be a few. At the moment that the Imperial Fists were united with Rogal Dorn, however, the shadow of eternal treachery still waited far in the future. Few integrations of Primarchs and Space Marine Legions were as swift and complete as that had been between Rogal Dorn and the Imperial Fists. The ideals of the Imperium and the purpose of the Great Crusade fitted with Dorn's outlook and drive, and the transhuman warriors of the Imperial Fist were exemplars not only of having that he had built an inward cluster, but everything he had dreamed of for his future. From the first moment Dorn ever met his gene sons, he demanded of them everything that he would ask of himself. It is said that when he met Legion Master Matthias and veteran contingents of the Imperial Fist, he said nothing, maintaining his silence even when they had knelt and pledged fealty to him. Only when he had observed them in battle did he break his silence and speak with them directly. He said that they had much to do and more to learn. To Matthias, he gave a single word of thanks for his service and named him High Castellan of the Inward Cluster. Such an honor was also a deep duty, for the next he gave was to raise 30 regiments of newly Imperial Fists from the mortals of the Inward system. Without waiting or looking back, Rogul, Dorn, and his gene sons then plunged back into the stars. Over the next 16 Terran decades, the Imperial Fists fought on the burning edge of the Great Crusade. Relentlessly, they pushed from war zone to war zone, were honored by each of their brother legions, and raised them high in esteem of many. In their methods of war, the ways of Inward and the echoes of the Seventh Legion victories combined, they drove ever on without pause or respite. Just as on Terra, they fortified and built to secure what they conquered, but just as before, they did not linger to the rule of their conquests. Whilst a Castilian with a household of warriors might remain to maintain its defenses, they did not administer or dry up any laws of force. For they were warriors of the Imperium, not its masters, and they existed to serve in war and die for its survival. What they did take from all the lands that they conquered were recruits. A famous example would be the Imperial Compliance Auction of Necromunda, where the Imperial Fists won a major victory against the Orcs on the ash waste of the Hive world. The Hive Lords consented to the recruits being drawn from their population in gratitude. A fortress chapel was duly consecrated, but the Imperial Fists were their esteemed guests, not masters. Rogal Dorn asked for no special rights on the world where the Imperial Fists recruited. Some Primarchs, such as the increasingly macronal Praetorian, took every opportunity to garrison a world for their legions and claim its fists and claim its ties. Dorn is famously recorded saying, "I want vassals," and was always satisfied to keep his legion as a military unit with none of the civil or political responsibilities that came to governing a legion's home world. During the Great Crusade, the Imperial Fist acted as a strategic reserve of the Emperor's forces due to their ability to rapidly redeploy to battlefields of broad phalanx. They made use of the detailed planning and as such were soon found to be supreme urban fighters and siege specialists. After several campaigns and thousands of conquered worlds being brought into the Imperium, the Emperor returned to Terra to build a capital from which he could run his new empire. He took the Imperial Fist with him and set them up as his Praetors and charged Dorn with the construction of the Imperial Palace, something that did not go unnoticed by the other Primarchs. Praetorian flew into a rage upon hearing that Dorn thought that the Imperial Palace would be proof against his assault, even by as mighty siege masters as the Iron Warriors, and he unleashed a torrent of violent and accusations against his brother, Primarch, so unfounded that the onlookers from his own legion were dumbstruck. After this outburst was reported to Dorn, the two Primarchs really spoke, neither legion serving in the same campaign again. The Imperial Fists were ever at the Emperor's side, and the Iron Warriors were part of the Horus Vanguard. Similarity encourages understanding, or at least some would claim so. In the case of Rogul Dorn and Praetorian, Primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion, this settlement not only fails, but it shatters under the weight of reality. For rarely could there be said to be two beings on the surface who are more resembled to each other, yet were separate by a greater chasm. Both were reserved to the point of tactum, both unyielding, both sublime artisans of war, who prize indomitable and endurance. There was so much that would suggest that they should see the world with one set of eyes, that perhaps they should see even closer than anyone else. That bitterest loathing could arise between two such closely matched skin seems incredible, but it was a reality. Some say from the first moment of their meeting. The exact roots and cause of this enmity cannot be known for certain. Any say Rogal, Dorn, and Praetorian. But if one looks closely, it seems as though the pair similarities were the cause of a discord rather than understanding. Both were stubborn, and more so challenged. Both spoke rarely, and brooded much behind their stone and iron mask. So as at this silence, one would aggravate the other. The blunt honesty of one roused the other to anger, and the intractability of both ensured that once the dispute was begun, neither would he. There were far more differences between the two than cannot be denied. And often these differences may have been the cause of disputes, even if they were wars, not unyielding cause. While both Rogal, Dorn, and Praetorian often a favorite siegecraft in war, they often differed in its execution. While both were pragmatic, Praetorian often displayed a brutal directness in raging war, applying overwhelming force or sustaining horrific casualties. While Dorn would never balk at paying such a price for victory, he rarely accepted large numbers of casualties except through necessity. Dorn was an undoubted realist and idealist above all else. Praetorian, a pragmatist first and foremost, on such correct foundations of the decades of the Great Crusade, heaped pleasures, honors, and disparities and mischance, and from the result of history, reap an enmity which would take both primarchs and their legions to the brink of destruction. The greatest of the Nacan Imperium's victories during the Great Crusade came in the form of the defeat of the largest Orc empire ever encountered in the 30th millennium. The Ordinary Crusade was a vast imperial assault on the Orc empire of the overworld Uruk. The capital world of this green-skinned stellar empire, and the site of its final assault by the Space Marine legions, lay in the center Urlaner system of the galaxy's Urlaner sector. The Crusades included the deployment of 100,000 Space Marines, 8 million Imperial Army troops, and thousands of Imperial starships and their support personnel. The Urlaner Crusade marked the high point of the Great Crusade's vast effort to reunite the scattered colony worlds of humanity. The Orcs of Urlaner represented the largest concentration of greenskins ever defeated by the military forces of the Imperium of Man before the third year for Armageddon began during the early first millennium. Following the defeat of the Orcs of Urlaner, the Emperor of Mankind returned to Terra to begin his vast project to open the Eldar webway for humankind. In his place to command the vast force of the Great Crusade, he left Horus. In the aftermath of his Urlaner Crusade, Horus was granted the newly created title of War Master, the commander-in-chief of all the Emperor's armies, and who possessed command authority over all other primarchs and every expeditionary fleet of the Great Crusade. Following his promotion to the exalted rank of War Master, Horus had solicited the opinions and advice of all his brother primarchs on the subject since the honor had been bestowed upon him. Being named War Master set him abruptly apart from them and raised him up above his brothers, and there had been some strife, objections, and discontent, especially from those primarchs who felt that the title should have been theirs. The primarchs were prone to sibling rivalry and petty competitions as any group of brothers. Guided by the shrewd political hand, it was likely his equerry Macagris. Horus had courted his brothers, stilling fears, calming doubts, reaffirming peace, and generally securing their cooperation. He wanted none to feel slighted or overlooked. He wanted none to think that they were no longer listened to. Some, like Sanguinius, Rogal, and Fulgrim, had acclaimed Horus's election from the outset. Others, like Angron and Perturabo, had raged ballously at the new order, and it had taken masterful diplomacy in the War Master's part to placate their choler and jealousy. A few, like Lehman Russ and Lionel Johnson, had been singularly resolved, unsurprised by the turn of events. But others like Roboot Gilliman and Jagatai Khan and Rogal Dorn had simply taken it in their stride, accepting the Emperor's decree as the right and obvious choice. Horus had ever been the brightest, the first and the favorite. They did not doubt his fitness for the role, for none of the Primarchs had ever matched Horus's achievements, nor the intimacy of his bond with the Emperor. It was to these solid reservations that these brothers that Horus turned into particular for counsel. Dorn and Gilliman both embodied the strongest and the most dedicated imperial qualities, commanding their legions' expeditions with peerless devotion and military genius. Horus desired their approval as a young man might seek the questions of older, more accomplished brothers. Following his promotion, Primarch Dorn had come to the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet at Horus's behest, so that the two of them might discuss in detail the obligations and the remit role of the War Master. Rogal Dorn possessed perhaps the finest military mind of all the Primarchs. He was as ordered and disciplined as Roboot Gilliman Ultramarines, as courageous as the Lions, yet still sober enough to allow the flash of inspiration, the flash of battle zeal that had won the likes of Lehman Russ and the Khan, so many victory wreaths. Dorn's record on the crusade was second only to Horus, but he was resolute where Horus was flamboyant, reserved where Horus was charismatic. And that was why Horus had been the obvious choice for the position. In keeping with his patient, stony character, Dorn's 7th Legion had become renowned for siegecraft and defense strategies. The War Master had once joked that where he could storm a fortress like no other, Rogal Dorn could hold it. If I ever laid assault to a bastion possessed by you, Horus had quipped at the recent banquet, then the war would last for all eternity. The best in attack by the beast in defiance. The Imperial Fists were an immovable object to the Lunar Wolves' unstoppable force. When the Emperor returned to Terra to build a capital world worthy of ruling a million planets, Dorn went as well, commanded by the Emperor to return to the Imperial homeworld and establish a guard around him there. The Imperial Fist Legion had been chosen by the Emperor's Praetorians, having always excelled in the construction of the fortress. Dorn was tasked with designing defenses of the Imperial Palace. They would prove to be magnificent and would be well tested in the following years as the storms of the Horus heresy broke ever over the Imperium. The Primarch Fulgrim once asked if Rogal Dorn thought the Imperial Palace could withstand an assault by the Iron Warriors Legion. Dorn's truthful answer that it could infuriate the Lions Warriors Primarchs Perturabo to such a degree that they would almost destroy each other in a battle years later during the heresy. Dorn and the entire Imperial Fist Legion were later recalled to Terra by the Emperor to take up garrison duty there near the end of the Great Crusade. Once the Horus heresy began, this garrison truly would transform into responsibility for preparing the defenses of Terra in the imperial palace for the coming invasion of the Horus and his traitor legions. Before the imperial fist could arrive at Terra in full compliance, the events of the Horus heresy overtook them. Stranded for some considerable time by severe warp storms, the Imperial Fist fleet eventually discovered the badly damaged Loyalist Death Guard frigate Elistine, and so learned of Horus's betrayal. However, at first, Dorn did not believe Captain Nathaniel Garo and nearly killed him when Garo said that his brother Primarch Horus was a traitor to the Imperium and the Emperor. Rogul Dorn was eventually convinced by several members of the Elistine survivors of the Isvan III massacre, notably Captain Garo, Lacton Jews of the Lunar Wolves, and Remembrancer Euphisto Kalir, that his brother Primarchs Horus, Fulgrim, Praetorian, and Angron was staging a full-scale rebellion against the Emperor's rule. Dorn therefore dispatched the bulk of his legion to the Isvan system of a war footing. He himself returned to Terra with his veteran Space Marine companies to bring word of the terrible events personally to the Emperor of Mankind. With his network of operatives and bondsmen and women, it is believed that even in the state of civil war, that the Imperium had fallen into the Alpha Legion, had the means of the opportunities to transfer material and personnel between sectors, including the Sagittarium Solar and the strategically vital Sol system, whose defense had been entrusted to the Imperial Fist and their Primarch, Rogal Dorn, the newly proclaimed Praetorian of Terra. Under the tireless efforts of the Imperial Fist, the Sol system had become a fortress. Each strata of the solar system being turned into a perfectly organized defiance zone to break the War Master Horus's eventual assault. Given the Alpha Legion's need to prove its own superiority, it was simply sacrificed to break down on Terra's suffered defenses. To humiliate the 7th Legion, they would have to infiltrate the most sacred, the most secure location of the entire galaxy, the Imperial Palace itself. Activating assets that had been dormant and hidden on Terra for several standard decades, the Alpha Legion would eventually succeed where all others had failed before, infiltrating several agents within the Imperial Palace and especially the University, where great statues had been erected to commemorate the Great Crusade's greatest generals, the Primarchs of the 20 Space Marine Legions. 2 plinths had stood empty for a long time, the statues adorning them destroyed when their respective owners were cast into oblivion and their history erased, the lost Primarchs. But the 9 statues of those Primarchs having turned against the Emperor had merely been covered up. This was the Alpha Legion's target, infiltrated legionaries, succeeded in penetrating the University and destroyed all statues except 2 of them, those of Altharius and Rogul Dorn. Intended as both a challenge and a message, this feat was deliberately kept secret from the other organizations within the Imperial Palace. Even the Regent of Terra, Mercator the Sigilite, and the Emperor's own bodyguards, the Legion Custodes, were forbidden to enter the University and witness the shaming of the Imperial Fist. By what means the Sigilites still discovered the presence of the Alpha Legion on Terra remains a mystery. But Rogul Dorn was adamant that he would deal with the treacherous 20th Legion in due course. Shortly after this act of sabotage, an Alpha Legion's fleet, led by Haro Master Calcilinus, attacked the Sol system's uttermost defenses, and managed to even capture several of Pluto's moons, which constituted the heart of the utmost defiance perimeter. What truly occurred, there remains a well-guarded secret, only kept by Rogul Dorn himself and his Huskari bodyguards. In order to prepare for Horus's advance towards Terra, the Alpha Legion was charged by the War Master to carry out vital acts of sabotage and preparation, which would plunge the solar system into complete chaos. Though heavily defended by the Imperial Fist Legion, led by Praetorian of Terra, Rogul Dorn himself, the Primarch Alpharius, aboard the flagship Alpha, led his fleet towards the solar system. He managed to successfully infiltrate the outer distances of the system by putting himself and the entirety of the personnel within his fleet into stasis. Meanwhile, the Alpha Legion's fleet approached at minimum speed and powered its vessels down to bare minimum in order to reduce their overall fleet signature. Thus, it took an entire standard year for the Alpha Legion's fleet to drift towards Soil and successfully reach the outskirts of Terra's defenses undetected, as warp travel had been strictly forbidden. Meanwhile, the Alpha Legion Praetorian, augmented and highly adept human agents, as well as the Alpha Legion operator system, teamed up and activated throughout the solar system. These sleeper cells had been planted standard years earlier before the outbreak of the Horus heresy, and upon activation, performed their primary functions of sowing destruction and diversionary terrorist acts, causing panic and anarchy. Multiple acts of murder and sabotage were conducted on a number of planets to distract and belligerate Imperial defenders from the Alpha Legion's true objective, Pluto, the linchpin of the Loyalists' surveillance network within the solar system. As Rogal Dorn was distracted by these diversionary attacks across the system, Alpharius' fleet comprised over 200 vessels, led by Alpha, struck Pluto and its moons, Charon, Castorius, Nyx, Styx, and finally Hydra. As the fleet arrived, a further uplisting instigated by Alpha Legion infiltrator teams erupted across the solar system. The Alpha Legion's primary objective was Hydra, a fortress Meon that orbited Pluto and was a major astrophic monitoring station. Alpharius himself led a team of Ultra Legion warriors to the attack on the moon. Meanwhile, the Loyalist defenders led by Captain Sigmund had just 30 ships to defend against the massive Alpha Legion's fleet. Due to the unexpected brutal assault, the severely outnumbered Loyalist fleet was badly mauled by the fire ships hidden among the Alpha Legion's fleet to wreak havoc on the Imperial Fist defenders. The captured fortress moons of Corobus rained down deadly fire upon Chiron, Nyx, and Styx with heavy weapons. Despite overwhelming odds, the Imperial Fist resolutely stood their ground in the face of Alpha Legion's overwhelming assault. Meanwhile, Archimaeus, Rogal Dorn's master of the Huascaris, was eventually able to deduce the Alpha Legion's true intentions, to sabotage the Imperial astropathic monitoring network centered on Hydra. During the fighting, Archimaeus led a Halcorius contingent in a daring assault upon the Alpha Legion's force, led by Primarch Alpharius himself. In the subsequent fighting, the Huascaris were killed and Archimaeus was left mortally wounded. All seemed lost, as the battle seemed to swing in favor of the traitor forces. But miraculously, the Imperial Fist's mobile star fortress Phalanx, led by Rogal Dorn himself, arrived with a massive Imperial fleet in tow. They were boosted by additional reinforcements from the Armon Imperial Force, utilizing the competing gravity walls throughout the solar system. The Imperial Fist fleet managed to arrive quickly by slingshotting itself towards Pluto. The Imperial Fist reinforcements immediately pacified to capture guns on Corobus, as Rogal Dorn led in the Huascaris in the assault upon the astropathic chamber of Hydra. Dorn and his remaining Huskarians teleported directly into the locked chamber, and soon joined the battle against Alpharius and his Lemelian Terminators. Archimaeus looked on helplessly as the two Primarchs fought one another in an epic life-or-death duel. When Alpharius was about to impale Dorn with his pale spear, the now dying Archimaeus attempted to intervene in the battle after splitting the now dying Archimaeus. Attempted to intervene in the battle after spotting Alpharius was pinned for a killing blow. However, he was six rebounded harmlessly off of the spear heft. Archimaeus was unaware that Dorn had anticipated the strike and stepped in to take the blow with his shoulder to pin Alpharius in place, then grabbed the spear with one hand and using his deadly chainsword, Storm's Teeth, Dorn sliced through Alpharius' wrists, severing his hands from his arms, before slashing his brother across the chest and impaling him with his own spear. Finally, Dorn finished off Alpharius with a deadly drop of his mighty chainsword into the top of his skull. With the death of their Primarch, the Alpha Legion's fleet withdrew and retreated from Pluto. At the moment of his twin Primarch's death, Omegon sensed the demise of his sibling and became distant. Shortly thereafter, he was notified that the War Master demanded that Alpharius speak with him so that he could know the status of the Alpha Legion's attack on the Sol system. Like he had done so many times before, Omegon immediately took upon himself his brother's name and permanently assumed the mantle of the sole Primarch of the 20th. Dorn was subsequently charged with bolstering defenses of the Imperial Palace, even further against the coming storm of the traitor Marines, and oversaw the construction himself. Dorn crafted great bastions, armed with millions of artillery cannons, and added steel plating to the towers and walls of the palace. He felt he was marrying perfection and beauty of the existing structure in doing so, and regretted it, even though it was necessary. Elements of his legions were also ordered to assault the schism-torn Mars, securing vital weapons, thousands of suits of new Mark V, Mark VI power armor, and munitions, and loyalist mechanicum. Even as the planet fell to chaos, tainted dark mechanism that had allied itself with Horus, though the Imperial Fifth Space Marine Force under Captain Camba Diaz took terrible casualties in the raid to secure the artificial and the crippled supplies. This material would later prove essential in holding off the siege of the Imperial Palace by the traitor Marines. What forces of his legion Dorn had taken with him would fight in the Siege of Terra, manning the Imperial Palace defenses with the aid of the Blood Angels Legion. When Horus dropped the shielding of his flagship, Dorn and his most trusted veterans, clad in the few suits of terminal armor remaining to the Loyalists, would teleport directly into the battle alongside the Emperor, Legio Custodes, and Sanguinius against the Horus forces in the chaos-twisted vessel. Unfortunately, Dorn and his chosen Astartes would land in the farthest from the Horus as the power of chaos warped the teleportation. Dividing the Imperial forces. Dorn and the Imperial Fists had to fight their way across almost the entire length of the battleship to reach the bridge. This meant that they would arrive too late to participate in the battle with Horus himself. Dorn was the one to find the bodies of the Emperor, Sanguinius, and Horus in the vessel's bridge after their titanic duel. He was also the one to hear directly from the fatally crippled Emperor in his final commands on how to rebuild the Imperium, and personally carried his shattered father's body to the resting place of the golden throne of the Imperial Palace, where he would lie, neither alive nor dead, for the next 10 millennia. After the interment of the emperor in the golden throne, Dorn was stricken with grief. He felt the emperor's near demise to be his fault and led his legion on a crusade of pestilence across the Imperium. He was summoned back to Terra when Rogul, now the Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial region, announced the adoption of his Codex Astartes, turning it from large Space Marine legions into much smaller 1,000 warrior Space Marine chapters. Dorn was initially outraged at this proposal, feeling that the Imperium blamed him, and rightly so, he thought, for the fall of his brother Primarchs. However, realizing what damage another internal conflict could do to the fragile peace of the Imperium, Dorn initially relented and agreed to the second founding. This was a dark period in Rogal Dorn's life. He believed he had both failed the Emperor and his legion now, faltered without the guiding light of the Master of Mankind. Dorn was so shaken to the core, shocked that the Imperium no longer trusted him or his legion, that now, after he lost the Emperor and the failures of the Great Crusade, the brotherhood of the Imperial Fifth Legion would be sundered as well. Without battle to focus them, the Imperial Fists hovered on the brink, unsure of their future, with Dorn despairing that he had not seen the Imperium changing while he hunted down the traitors. Dorn, Leman Russ of the Space Wolves, and Vulcan of the Salamanders all at first refused the dictates of the Codex, and the Imperium seemed poised to tear itself apart in civil war again. The Imperial Fist Strike Crusader, the terrible angel, was even fired upon by the newborn Navis Imperialis for the Imperial Fist's supposed heresies against the Imperium's new order. It was at this time that the Iron Warriors issued a clear challenge that Dorn could not refuse by building an immense fortress and daring the Imperial Fist to attack it. Some controversy exists about the new event in Rogal Dorn's life. What is clear is that the Imperial Fist could not be as easily divided into chapters as, for example, the Ultramarines could. The total commitment to the entire Legion was bred into each Imperial Fist Astartes, and many did not wish to from their own successful chapters. Dorn found the answer to this problem in meditation through self-inflicted pain, using the device known as the Pain Glove. The pain-induced vision that the Primarch had while using this device revealed that his legion had to be redeemed in the eyes of the Emperor, and that the way to salvation was through pain and self-sacrifice. Dorn meditated for 7 full solar days in the Pain Glove until his new vision of the Emperor. Dorn realized in that moment that the Emperor was not dead and gone, and that he was still watching over his sons, and that the Imperium from within the Golden Throne. Decreeing that the Emperor Fists would all metaphorically center the Pain and Gloves as a legion, and emerge as separate chapters, symbolically reborn. Dorn led his die-hard warriors in assault of the Iron Warlord's fortress. The collective pain needed to cleanse the legion and break it into chapters was decided by Dorn to be the siege of an Iron Warrior's fortress, the so-called Iron Cage. The battle known as the Iron Cage had gone down in history as one of the great tragedy and remorse for the Imperial Fists. For not only was it disaster, it was also signified the end of the 7th Legion as a united fighting force. The battle known only as the Iron Cage has gone down in history as one of the greatest tragedy and remorse for the Imperial Fists. However, some suspect that Dorn already knew the outcome when he threw himself and his legion into the assault. It is believed that Dorn knew that many of his zealous warriors would never accept the dissolution of the 7th Legion as the adoption of the Codex Astartes required, and that by throwing themselves into suicidal assault on the Iron Cage, they would at least be granted an honorable death, for that is exactly what many of them got. The Iron Cage was actually a defensive trap set up by the Iron Warriors Traitor Legion on the world of Sebastius VI. That it was known as the Internal Fortress, and that was a besieging force's nightmare straight from the depths of hell. The Iron Warriors were master of siege and defense, and Perturabo's writings on the subject had even been retained by the Primarch Rogul in the Codex Astartes. But Dorn was Perturabo's equal, and famous in defiance of the traitors. The Imperial Fist launched an all-out assault straight into the heart of the Iron Warriors' defenses within the internal fortress. Emerged that the enemy had dared raise their heretical banners over another imperial world in the wake of the Horus heresy. Without any planning of strategy, or the Imperial Fist fought with zeal, endurance, and sheer grit and determination, breaking out of every trap, fighting through any ambush, and breaching every defiance that got in their way. Dorn led the attack, a colossus who threw back every assault. While the battle should have favored the Iron Warriors in the network of trenches and redoubts, the Imperial Fist matched the Iron Warriors' guile with cold fury. Brother fought brother in half-flooded trenches, tearing at each other with knives and chainswords. When all of the ammunition was expended, neither giving nor expecting any quarter. The Iron Warriors, Demon Primarch Perturabo, had built the massive fortifications to mock the Imperial Fist, and Dorn led his most die-hard followers in a siege that would last for several solar weeks. The Iron Warriors, not twisted heretic Astartes, claimed that the Imperial Fist suffered a crushing defeat, and that Dorn and his legions would have been wiped out if Perturabo hadn't prolonged Dorn's suffering as long as he did, and the Ultramarines' legions managed to intervene. Imperial records of the battle indicate otherwise. The Imperial Fist had always been masters of siegecraft, and even unprepared and at a disadvantage, they fought like lions. Dorn stood as a giant in their midst. His mind was clear with purpose after many standard years of doubt and guilt since the Emperor's intimate in the Golden Throne. Eventually, it became obvious that though the Imperial Fist had suffered horrible losses, the Iron Warriors could not finish them off, lacking the faith to make the ultimate sacrifice to achieve victory. During a pause in the fighting, Rogul and his Ultramarines intervened in the struggle, extracting the battered Imperial Fist and letting the Iron Warriors escape. Gilliman had decided that the destruction of the Iron Warriors was not worth the death of Rogul Dorn, and so he came with the entirety of his legion to break up the brutal fight and drive the Iron Warriors off. With their cleansing in the fires of battle at the Iron Cage over, the Imperial Fist withdrew into seclusion, allowing the Codex Astartes provisions to apply to the 7th Legion and break it up. Then, letting their successive chapters take to the field in their stead. For 2 solar decades, the Imperial Fist reorganized. Under the direction of Dorn, the chapter absorbed the tenets of the Codex Astartes, and by the time they reappeared on the battlefield of the Imperium, their adherences to the Codex was second only to the Ultramarines themselves. Dorn was one of the most long-lived Primarchs, but with the death or disappearance of each of his brothers, he grieved more and more. He witnessed the phenomenon of many of the Primarchs coming to be regarded as demigods by the peoples of the Imperium in the later 31st millennium as the cult of the Emperor worship grew stronger and spoke out against the practice, proclaiming that the Emperor alone was worthy of such devotion, for each of his sons had failed him in some manner. It is generally believed that Dorn fell in battle against the forces of Chaos in 781.M31 while resisting a large Chaos war fleet during the First Black Crusades, the first of the periodic and devastating incursions into the imperial space by the traitor legions from their hellish sanctuary worlds within the Eye of Terra. Commanded by the returned Abaddon the Despoiler as the head of the Black Legion, the renamed and reformed sons of Horus, the Chaos Fleet, vastly outnumbered the Imperial Force. The Imperial Force. Seeing the importance of attacking the enemy fleet while they were still preparing to invade the Imperial space, Dorn relied on hit-and-run attacks until his reinforcements could arrive. Dorn and these companies of the Imperial Fist mounted a masterful series of boarding actions against the Crusades' warships, crippling drives and life support systems, and even capturing weapons, batteries, and turning them against into other Chaos vessels. Eventually, however, the enemy cornered Dorn and his warriors as he launched a final attack on the bridge of the Chaos flagship, the Spoiler-class battleship, Sword of Sacrilege. None survived to tell the glorious tale of the Primarch's last stand. One story claims that the Imperial Fist's chief librarian found his Primarch's body on the bridge on a chilling reprise of Dorn's discovery of the wounded Emperor during the end of the Siege of Terra and Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, and bore him away to an unknown destination before the stricken flagship's escape back to the internal depths of the Eye of Terror. Yet other tales claim that all that remained of the Primarch was his hand, which was recovered by the Imperial Fist of that era, and which is kept in stasis by them aboard the Phoenix. Dorn's now skeletal left fist is kept within the shrine aboard the mobile fortress monastery. The bones intricately engraved scumshard with the heraldry of all the chapter's previous masters. Only Imperial Fist chapter master has the right to engrave his name upon the bones. For instance, upon the first Metatoclap, as inscribed by the names of the bowmen Amoth, Maximus Dane, and Kalaman Fludsberg, while upon the first Phalanx of the thumb of the name of the Astonian Spectre, and so forth, the Hand of Dorn. Whatever its true origin, is the Imperial Fist's holiest icon and serves as a reminder of the sacrifice and commitment to expected of every Astartes. So it was that throughout the Imperial Fist history, from the Orc onslaught of the beasts in the mid-32nd millennium to the 13th Black Crusade, they have drawn inspiration from their Primarch's remains and resolved their foes or die in the attempt. Whether it was the first actually to belong to Rogal Dorn or his remains lies elsewhere is unknown. Despite his apparent death during the First Black Crusade, Dorn's true fate as yet remains unclear. During the War of the Beasts in the mid-32nd millennium, the resurrected Primarch Vulcan stated to Corlin that he would speak well of that Imperial Fist man Rogal Dorn, implying his brother Primarch yet lived. According to Conrad Kurz, after the end of the Horus heresy, however, Dorn is dead. KIA, killed in action, after being torn to pieces by the enemy during the assault of the Sword of Sacrilege. This fate had been foreseen by the Night Hunter when the two brothers had met on Nostemo. Kurz would confirm this outcome standard years later when he reflected on the past while awaiting his assassination by Masham.